Thank you very much, Kailash. First of all, I want to appreciate Kailash for continuously working with me. We have a very long-standing relationship. Kailash and Add-on Skulls, we have been having a lot of trainings and a lot of discussions around how to make things better in terms of agile and program and portfolio and project management, quality, and a number of different things. So a huge thanks is in order. So today I'm going to be focusing on what patterns to avoid in agile ceremonies. And before that, let me just get started with a quick overview of myself. I consider myself as a scholar practitioner, and I have a lot of educational background. My PhD was in organizational leadership, MBA in management, MS in computer engineering, and bachelorate in electronics and communication. Like Kailash was mentioning, I have a number of certifications. In fact, the only certification that I have not bothered to receive is the project business analyst, but I was a contributor to the project business analyst book of knowledge as well. Scrum Master, Scrum Product Owner, Agile Certified Coach, Scrum Developer, Scrum certifications, and Sarbanes-Oxley, Six Sigma, Black Belt with Lean, and all those things I have. I also have been doing a lot of self-initiated research and published a lot of postdoctoral publications that are scholarly peer-reviewed. Some of them include the framework for tones, parag, and sleep, and people that want to know more about it, can go and look into this. Very rich background in terms of the number of industries that I have worked for, medical industries, medical devices, pharmaceutical, healthcare, financial, insurance, blood bank, forestry, a lot of different things that I have worked on at this point, very high scale projects as well as change management initiatives. And I also do a lot of training online as well as coaching sessions and all those things as part of my own company that I started, Agile Training Champions, and Add-on and I are partners on that as well. And I also try to do a lot of volunteering, teaching, speaking, and writing with a number of different places. I have listed some of them over here with experience in a number of different countries all over the world. That's in a nutshell about me. And I recently also published a book. It's called Organized Common Sense. It's primarily targeting why project management skills apply to everyone and why that's nothing more than an art. And so it is almost to the point of how these skills can be applied even at high school, college levels, regardless of your choice of professions, how these skills will actually be applicable. It's available online in a number of online retailers, and it's also available in the actual publisher's website that I have given over here. That's in a nutshell about me. So let me start thinking about the actual talk that we are trying to give. So when people start thinking in terms of what patterns to avoid in agile ceremonies, one of the things that I started questioning myself is, do we even understand why we need to be in an agile framework? Forget about implementing agile and failing agile, but do we need to even understand in the first place why agile? Why not waterfall? So when we started looking at these patterns, I started questioning and asking a lot of people based upon the things that I just mentioned. Is it related to people that we are failing, or is it related to some of the processes that we have or don't have properly in place? Is it relating to the technological considerations that we have or are not necessarily enabled correctly? Or is it related to organizational challenges? When you look at this, deep, by applying all the logics behind, the root cause analysis and everything else, when you look deep underneath, it's coming down to people. It's not computer that's failing. It's the processes that we have or we have put in place that's failing. So ultimately, everything is coming down to group of people, conflicts, internal challenges, not necessarily following things through correctly and all those things. It's ultimately coming down to people and people and people and people. Right? How we don't do things as promoted and things like that. So based upon my own experience, we all say like waterfall is not good, and that's not necessarily right. And I even talk about in some of my scholarly publications, waterfall exists only in people's mindset. There was never a theory called waterfall that was even promoted. For those of you that want to know more about this, I can talk at a later point. But if waterfall never worked according to practitioners' insights, and we embrace agile as a result of that, we also need to know the practices that led to waterfall failure, right? And if we continue to do the same practices, even in an agile implementation, then agile will fail too. That's why we call agile fall, fragile, and all those things. So that's going to happen constantly. So we need to understand what contributed to waterfall failure, and then try to come back and say, are we actually enabling the same approaches in an agile? And if we are doing that, then accidents are just waiting to happen at this point. And we have seen that in a number of different studies already that is getting published, in where people are saying like, I don't want to go with agile but, and all those things. So I started, looking into the details behind why agile fails. When you look at the reasons behind agile fail, many times people come with the notion of, oh, we don't have the executives buy-in or vision. There's no proper commitment. Or the team is very fragile. They are on learning wheels and they're not really getting ready to understand how agile works. And as a result, things did not work. Or we are having too much process inflammation, like everything is process, and we are not following the lean thinking in terms of how we continue to move forward. Or there is a technical myopia or short-sightedness in terms of what technologies to use and how to use, and the entire technological stack related discussions when you think about all these things. But I started asking more questions and looking at patterns as part of my own experience. And there were several things that came up, So people used to say, our iterations are too long, so we're not doing iterations and we use sprints. Well, iteration in Agile is sprint in Scrum, both are frameworks. And so if you're trying to not differentiate these two things correctly, then you are truly not even understanding properly Agile. So saying iterations are too long, so we use sprints makes no sense, right? Then we do daily stand-up, so it makes us Agile. Daily stand-up is just one part of it. That doesn't mean that, by doing that, you are going to be Agile, right? We are lean, so we do all the product owner role. So we don't have any specific person called product owner, but, we are all together on this. We are lean. We don't want to have, an investment in getting a dedicated product owner or somebody like that. But that's not leanness. Right? Every SDLC stage is done in one sprint. This is another biggest pet peeve where you say like, okay, we will do the first sprint, we will do analysis. The second sprint, we will do design. The third sprint, we'll do development. Fourth sprint will be, testing. So I have people that come back and say, we are on a testing sprint. Like, what do you mean by testing sprint? It doesn't make sense. At the end of the testing, at the end of the sprint, a product increment has to be released. And if you don't understand that logic, you're not even understanding Agile. You're just making a shoehorning waterfall into an Agile mindset and thinking like, you are Agile, right? Working software equals number of closed Jira tickets. This is another major issue. We are following the tool of choice and saying like, okay, the more tasks that we close, the more things that we do in that, software, then we are going to be, more and more creating working software. That's not necessarily true. In some of the agile world, people will talk about what is called a Jira monkey. Like we want to create tasks for the sake of creating a task, and the more tasks we say that it is getting close, the more we are good. And we don't want to not only create tasks, we want to create subtasks and subtasks. So this is not necessarily a good indication of working software. Working software at the end of the day is going to be what does the customer want, and are we working to create that value proposition? And we had to choose the wrong technology stack. And so this is another free, like, oh, we were not allowed to create the right stack. We were not provided the right tools and training and all those things. I did not get the training from the company. It's all those things. So why should the company continuously train you? At the end of the day, your future is in your hands. So you have to focus on your own self-improvement. Continuous improvement is not necessarily coming from the company alone. That needs to be a two-way street. And so all these fundamental reasons are the ones people are trying to find out in terms of why things don't work out right. On the one end of the spectrum, Agile therefore never works for some people. And the other end of the spectrum, where people want to be only Agile, everything is supposed to be, then they all say everything is Agile for me. We don't want to think about anything else. Everything is Agile at this point. So these are not the right patterns to actually understand and discover for us, right? So some of the patterns I started looking at are at two different levels. So I created a big strategy group and an execution group, right? At the core is going to be the execution, because Agile is all about execution, right? So when you are looking at that, there is a couple of a few patterns I picked up. So one is task-oriented and overburdened team. This is going to be creating, I don't know how the work product that I'm producing, or the task that I'm working on, how is that actually adding value, right? Value is all from the benefits that you are producing, aligned with what the customer wants and what the performing organization needs, right? If that alignment doesn't exist, then you are actually going to lose it. As a result, you are creating a overburdened team. More and more we have to do, because we want to create those number of tickets to be closed, more and more. And so task orientation, we don't necessarily align it with the strategy and the benefit and the value, right? And the next one is going to be a failure to build the team consensus. The team has to make the commitment. It's all coming down to the team. It's not what your product owner, scrum master, or project manager, or program manager are saying. At the end of the day, you are making the team commitment. Together, we are together, right? And that building of the team commitments, the farming, storming, norming, performing, none of that is working, right? As a result, the team doesn't gel together, and we are trying to find out challenges. And remember, self-organization is extremely critical for Agile to succeed. The next one is neglecting technical excellence, right? So at the end of the day, technical people and business people should collaborate, and that's one of the fundamental principles in Agile. And when we try to neglect the technical aspects of it and focus completely on, well, I don't know, I just need to get this thing done so that I am able to keep up that velocity, then you are creating what is called technical debt, right? You're not spending time for refactoring. You're not spending time for making the code modular, scalable, sustainable, simple, and all those things, and you are creating technical debt constantly. I'm not even going to go into the technical stack, architecture, and all those things, right? Even at that level, we have the challenge. And then Agile practice without principles. Some of the things we don't even understand what the differences between Lean, Agile, Scrum, and all those things, and we start using words the way we want to use it. The example that I told you was, the iteration and sprint. SDLC practiced in every stage of SDLC practiced in a sprint. These are all incorrect practice. This is not what Agile is. But we just pick up from reading a book, or going to one or two webinars and all those things, and not necessarily getting the full gist of it, right? And I have had some people that basically say, I'm a Scrum Master, so I know everything about Agile. Then I asked them, like, okay, tell me more about Lean principles, the Muda, Mura, and Muri. What is that? Can't understand that, right? If you don't understand that Agile is just a subset of Lean, how do you know all the other things that you have to understand? Right. So these are all, some of those things that people are missing. And at the strategy level, people that are bringing the groups together and all those things, there are other patterns that evolve. That's going to be inconsistent or siloed adoption, right? So one business unit is following Agile, the other business unit is not following Agile, and so there is conflict, and people don't necessarily work together. And in that weak adoption makes things don't work together completely at all. Right. The other approach is going to be weak product strategy. Even when you are having Agile approaches to developing products and things like that, you need to have a product roadmap. It's just like when you are putting together a program, you have a program roadmap as to what's coming by the end of this year, by the end of 6 months, by the end of this quarter, what functionalities are focused on. We need to have that. If we don't have that, and then start actually looking at how our product backlog is aligned with the product roadmap, that is aligned to the strategic roadmap, we are completely missing everything else, and we just want to do whatever we want to do. That's not good agile practice at the execution level, at the strategy level too. And cultural conditioning, making sure that we are providing that cultural context. I don't mean the the national culture context, but organizational culture. No, we are in this together. It's okay to fail. It's okay to experiment and run into some failures. But are we actually continuously improving? That kind of a culture, right? If that doesn't exist, then people are going to be afraid of doing something and experimenting new ideas. And we are not necessarily leading the market, rather we are trailing the market, right? Next one is the executive commitment. People in the executive level are not necessarily making the commitment, like making sure that the proper tools are in place. The tools are holistic. Are we having tools that are giving rapid authoring of test cases and rapid execution of test cases? Are we looking at continuous integration, continuous deployment tools? Are we looking at an application lifecycle management tool in the first place, where there is a lot more good traceability and things like that? We are not looking at all those things. We just want to delegate decisions to other people and not necessarily become involved. When all these things are happening, we get into different problems that manifest itself. And that's when I started moving into what are some of those major categories of problems that manifest itself, right? And I started looking at the control versus chaos theory. So how we do versus what we do. So when you look at that same thing, at the beginning, you are going to have a strategy and you are going to look at the execution, right? So the strategy, when the strategy is not necessarily clear and properly articulated, neither the company owners nor the actual people that are working for the company, the employees, truly understand why the organization even exists. And I'm sure those of you that have sat with, with Kailash, he keeps telling about the vision and the mission and, the alignment and values and all those things. If those things don't exist, we are not coming together as a team at all, right? The other one is going to be, those things are kind of explained, but we don't have the appropriate middle management structure. And so we are not able to actually, release the employees' creativity correctly and all those things. So everything is exploratory, but it shows leadership immaturity. Leadership meaning, middle management, as well as team leaders, as well as, the executive leadership. And then on the other hand is going to be, well, these things are somewhat defined, but then there is a lot more control on the middle management to make sure that things don't fail. What will they do at that point? Myopic vision, right? We need to make sure that we are good in front of the customers. We are in front of the business people. It doesn't matter. So somehow let's make up a number. Velocity is going to be 120. So if you're constantly showing that we are 120 points worth of velocity in every sprint, we look good, right? That's not necessarily appropriately good. But the most pressing thing is going to be this controlled chaos. The controlled chaos is you don't know everything you want to know. You know something, but you don't know how you are going to do it. And that's where Agile really comes into play, where you are able to actually have the complex decision making, where you are able to talk to the customers, work with the business people, and experiment new ideas, and constantly, continuously improve by using the notions of progressive elaboration, which is what Agile calls as iterative and incremental delivery, right? So how does this manifest? We have 4 ceremonies in Agile, and the first is going to be iteration planning. Begin with a good product backlog. But what is good? What is considered as a good product backlog, right? We haven't defined that correctly at all. And so we don't know whether we even have a good product backlog in the first place, right? The next one is going to be daily stand-up. In the daily stand-up, we basically say, empower the team to be self-organized, faster and faster and faster. But what does self-organization even mean? How do we know that we are accomplishing the goal, right? When we are not actually doing that, then we are moving into the review. In the review, we are actually supposed to not only do the demo, but also actually evaluate the backlog and how to groom it. In that case, you may want to add some technical value-added stories, some process value-added stories, some business value-added stories. We're not doing that. Why should all these things be the responsibility of only one person, the product owner? Product owner is accountable, but everyone is responsible. right? Everybody is consulted. And then the retrospective. During this retrospective, use an operational excellence mindset. What is operational excellence? Continuously making things better. That is actually in the production as well as in the working of the customer's team delivery process. Right? It has to be constantly improvement, right? That's when the productivity increases. But we don't necessarily understand all these things correctly, and so we do not sow the success seeds for Agile to flourish, right? So based upon all these things that I said, I created 12 critical patterns. Those 12 critical patterns are mapping into 4 different dimensions, which I already talked about, right? Strategy is failing, right? Why would the strategy fail? I'm going to expand on these things, but there is no dedicated product owner, and there is one person that serves more than one particular goal, and priority stories are not necessarily completely ready, right? And these things are all indicative of strategy failing, right? The next one is going to be planning fails. In the planning stage, we are not necessarily selecting the correct stories because we don't have the right product roadmap, and the release plan and iteration plans are not properly aligned with that value alignment. As a result, we are selecting whatever stories we think we can do, right? And coach is creating tasks. That's also not good. There is a difference between how project management is practiced and how Agile is practiced. And we try to estimate everything in hours because we can't understand what the story point is. Like, nobody can define it, so we are going to do everything in hours only, right? And then we are moving into the team failure. People are not ready with the updates. Metrics are not necessarily set up to succeed. We have too many metrics, or we have incorrect matrices. Risks wait for the next stand-up meeting to be resolved, because you don't have to have multiple meetings and just have difficulties with other team members. So we are waiting. Proper. Okay. We have too many meetings. Reviews don't have the right stakeholders in the demonstrations, and the retrospectives are becoming optional because of lack of time, or it's not useful and things like that. When these things are all happening, I have picked up these patterns to say Agile is failing for one or more of these reasons, and we need to nip them in the bud. If these things are not going to be nipped in the bud, you cannot be guaranteed of the success that you really want to see. And this is what I was referring earlier, as if we don't understand why waterfall fail, we are going to make sure that we will repeat those patterns to ensure that Agile fails too. And Agile doesn't fail, but we fail Agile. Okay, so I want to expand on this thought process a little bit over here. So strategy, I talked about strategy before, so address the cultural issues, product alignment with business, and getting the teams ready. So those are some of the patterns that we want to talk about. And the no dedicated product owner. When there is no dedicated product owner, who is owning the product vision? Who is the voice of the customer? Right? There is no one accountable person to go after different types of users, different groups of users, and gather that particular feedback. What does this customer want? What are these groups of people want? What does the business stakeholders want? We need to have that. And that is not being present. As a result, the product backlog is not completely flushed out with the right value-added stories. Product marketing stalls, losing customer base. If there is no proper product marketing mindset on the product development person, then we are going to have that one fail too. This is another reason why I will see, there is a technical product owner and a commercial product owner. These are not necessarily good. A technical product owner focusing only on the technology side of it, and the commercial product owner focusing only on the commercial part of this. And we are creating more and more and more and more people, right? That's not necessarily good, because the more people you have, from your project management principles, there is going to be more lines of communication, which means more conflicts, and we are not necessarily resolving the problem. We are creating the problem. We have to have a dedicated product owner, right? One FTE, full-time employee, serves as the coach and the product owner. Well, this is another major problem, because we cannot afford, we want to be lean, and so we cannot have investment in 2 people that acts as a scrum master and product owner, and so we want to do this. What will that do? Role clash. right? In your RACI diagrams, I always try to communicate that you cannot have a single cell with both responsible and accountable. If you do that, what happens? I'm going to be accountable, but I'm not doing the work. Then what will I do? I will say, okay, I'm okay with this mediocre work or poor quality of work. I will convince myself. It's very easy to convince myself because I'm the person who is going to be responsible and as well as accountable, right? Then I can make it work as though I'm doing everything that I need to do, even when I'm not doing the good job. That's what is going to happen with the role clash. So a cognitive and motivational bias are introduced, right? You are believing what you think you are right, and you are not necessarily going to be believing what is actually right. And the balancing of the work with the right value is not necessarily happening. So when somebody is questioning you, is this right? Are you thinking right? Why do we need that? That's why we always say, 1 + 1 is greater than 3, right? So the next one is business stakeholders are not consulted in grooming the backlog. If you go into a room and start thinking, this is what I want, how do you know that the business stakeholders' wants are? Right? The process of eliciting the needs, customer stories, business stories, untold stories, and all those things have to come into play. Sometimes people do not necessarily articulate their requirements well. So you need to do that management by walking around and observation, documentation, and things like that. You need to gather stories in a much more meaningful way, right? The third thing is going to be team is not coached on any of those agile principles. So we are saying like, okay, we'll be fine with the way we are actually delivering the work. And product owner, who is actually the same person as a scrum master, is the person who gives the feedback. And if that particular person cannot be present, then we are left with both the scrum master as well as the product owner, which creates a huge gap. And the team is not mature enough to handle these problems. And so what happens? Commitments are slipped and velocity goes down, right? That's not acceptable too, right? So the N+2 priority backlog is missing, So when we say we are having N+2 backlog, what we are trying to say is if you are working on the nth sprint, the backlog should be with, flushed with enough stories that are actually ready for estimation. I'm not talking definition of done. I'm talking about definition of ready. And that comes with understanding competitive of advantage, right? In the program and portfolio management, we talk about some of these things about the Porter's 5 forces, right? What is the existing competitions? What is the potential entry? What is the buying power of suppliers and buyers? And what substitute products are available? We have to know that. And what is our product's competition? Every team member should know this. It's not just the product owner's responsibility. Whether you are a technical person, developer, tester, creative person, script writer, whatever your role is, you have to be able to understand this particular competition. That's when you are also actually acting as the feedback person, providing like, hey, this customer is doing that. I heard in another webinar that they are doing this. I heard about this thing in a conference. That has to come through. That's when you are actually making sure that the stories are getting flushed with enough stories and aligned with the product roadmap. You have an N+2 product vision. That means you are having more stories completely ready, which is keeping the entire team in an operating cadence, right? So what are supposed to be happening? Product backlog is then not ready and flushed with appropriate persona and user stories. I have seen like people that are delivering, 15 sprints. And then I ask them like, okay, what are all the representative persona in all your 15 sprints that you have delivered so far? There is no such thing as, persona classifications at all. Well, then how are you writing your user stories? Oh, we don't write user stories. We write business requirements in a BRD or a functional requirement specification document, and we create tasks and link them. Not good. Right? The next one is no hardening iteration 0. How are we actually bringing the team together? Whether it is supposed to establish the people's norms, ensuring definition of ready, definition of done, and when is it considered to be ready for demo. If we don't have all those things, how do we do things? We need to have proper planning. So if we fail to plan, we plan to fail, right? And then the next one is going to be no value-added user stories or extreme persona considered. Extreme persona is, more like how well the people will not necessarily use the system. An aggravated user, a hacker person. I created what is called an abuser persona, and I talked about that as well. We need to think about how people use the system, but we should also think about persona that will use the system in ways not intended to be used, right? And then begins premature discussion on velocity. The very first meeting that we are trying to talk about, what do you think we should, how many velocity points we should deliver? Why are we even talking about that when you don't even have proper priority backlog, right? This is like the child asking, are we there yet? After 2 minutes or, 15 minutes of driving, when we have to drive for 2 hours, after 15 minutes, the child asks, are we there yet? That's exactly what we are trying to do over here. Right? That's not good. So what are some of the antidote to strategy failure? So when you look at this, there are 6 different things that I have created, right? Get senior management to commit to Agile. That requires an enterprise coaching mindset, right? Embrace cultural agility across the organization. So it's not like one team, another team. We can actually go in an iterative fashion, but we need to actually, show the value and make sure that, people are getting into this, so that there is a good return on investment on the total cost of ownership. Promote continuous learning, right? It's okay to fail, but we don't want to repeat the same failure. That's why lessons learned are required, retrospectives are required, right? But you need to make sure that the continuous improvement is constantly present. If customers are important, get a dedicated product owner. By the same token, if employees are important, make sure you are getting a dedicated coach. And these 2 people are supposed to keep things in balance, right? One without the other, you don't get the actual depth of vision. Enhance transparency to product backlog. Make sure that other people are able to see it. Whether it is an electronic dashboard or a physical dashboard does not mean. You need to create, other mechanisms by which other people are able to come into the board and, review and provide, contextual feedback. The more you keep everybody out, the more you are actually creating the silo yourself, right? So planning failure, how does the planning failure actually manifest? You need to start with the end in mind. And I'm sure we have all heard about that before in the 7 habits of highly effective people, but we need to start with the end in mind. And how do you do that? Incorporate risk in the planning. Uncertainty is to be expected. Get the team involved in the planning. And it's not like, I'm going to say, this is what you have to do, but the team has to already know much in advance, because there is proper transparency and there is a constant dialogue happening as part of the grooming. How do we do this? Planning is not properly time boxed to start the iteration. At the end of planning, you have to start the iteration. If there is gap between planning meeting and the actual start of the iteration, things are not working right. And we'll come back and say, well, we didn't get through all the things, and so we are going to start the planning, the iteration 2-3 days later. Not good. Planning also should be having 2 important elements. The first 50% of the time should be on the story selection. The remaining 50% of the time should be spent on task breakdown in terms of how we are going to accomplish this, and looking at, independence and all those things. If we don't do this, then we are not properly time boxing ourselves to ensure that we are delivering value. Planning should not spend time on prioritization of the user stories for the iteration. We are spending more time only on that particular pass, and then we are saying, like, okay, let's start the iteration, now go ahead and create all the different tasks that you want. And then as part of the task breakdown, you are actually thinking like, oh my God, I missed that. We should have consulted that legal person, or we should have talked to that IT guy to make sure that enough license is there before we can start working. And we go there and ask them, and those group members say, they are not available, or they are telling like, oh, in order to procure the license or procure this, you need to wait for 5 days. What are we creating? We are creating waiting time. Not good. And if you are not able to actually do the work after this waiting time is over, we are basically saying like, oh, we shouldn't have committed this. Well, we should have known that much in advance, because we did not think of the risk from the stakeholders' perspective. It's not just what I think I want to do, it's also about how other people perceive the work, the value of work that I'm doing. So if you are not able to think, what are all the other users that will actually want to comment on this from a racist point, then you are not factored risk. And so pushing the iteration this way is not necessarily good. So planning should be properly time boxed, telling like if I'm having a 4-hour meeting, at the end of 2 hours, we are done with story selection. And then the remaining 2 hours, we are looking at all the different things that we need to do. At the end of that planning, we have looked into the factors about risk and we are saying like, yep, we said we will do this, but as part of our task breakdown, we have a dependency here. So we should not do this right now. We should get this, put it back into the product backlog so that we get that thing properly groomed and addressed before it is, meeting the definition of ready. Right? Coach creates tasks. This is another problem. The coach starts thinking like, okay, let me create the task. In project management, you are actually doing that activity sequencing, and you are actually, even though the teams is giving this input, you are creating the activity sequencing and all those things yourself, and then you are actually telling people to do. The project management does not necessarily mean that you have to basically assign the task one by one. That's how people practice project management, but that's not exactly how it should be done. But in the end, if the agile approach, if the coach creates the task, then what is going to happen is the coach is becoming part of the micro focus. The focus of the coach is, are we doing the right stories? Have we picked the right stories? Do we have the right technical and competencies at this point to complete this iteration? Are we focusing on something else that we should have done? Do we have proper capacity? Capacity meaning like resource optimization. All these thought process should be going on in the coach mind. Instead, if the coach is ignoring all those things and say, I'm going to create the tasks for you guys, then we are not actually becoming a servant leader, right? Coach should be a facilitator and not continue to become a scribe. Scribe is the person who takes the notes and does the work, right? And coach should actually get the team self-organized. The coach should basically tell like, how do we have to go do this? Why do you think we should do this? The coaching mentality is asking those powerful questions to actually allow the team to discover their own capabilities and solve them, right? Not necessarily solve the problem for them. Right? When we are not doing all these things, we are not harnessing the power of the team, because we are making the team more dependent on us and not necessarily become self-organized. So we are creating the problem. Right? These things should not happen at all. So what is estimable in the backlog and how? I said like everything is going to be in hours. That's not necessarily good, right? So when you look at this is how ideas break down, right? So at the top, I have the granularity, and at the bottom, I have the time scale. So at the T0, the initial things, I have a huge dream. I want to build a castle in the air, on all those things. And now I'm thinking like, okay, what do you mean by a huge castle in the air? I'm trying to think of, ideas like how will it float? How will it stand? And things like that. And that becomes the epic. How can you actually estimate them? You don't. And I have seen people that basically say, implement security. What does that mean? Implementing security for, across the organization or for the data. If it is in the data, it is for encrypting the data in memory or at rest or during transit. What are we talking about? We don't know anything. And there will be a big bucket of item like, oh, it takes 16 sprints. How did you know that? Maybe it is only 2 sprints worth. Maybe it is 200 sprints worth. I don't know that, right? Then you are moving that into the next phase, going to be like, okay, now I'm breaking them into smaller and smaller and smaller. The big houses that I want to build, because I can actually, make a house float in the air. So I'm thinking of a huge house. And now we are telling like, what does a huge house mean? Big yard, big swimming pool, and now we are cutting down everything and say, well, I just want to have a quiet place for my studies, a quiet place for my kids, quiet place for family and guest rooms. Okay, now you are building down to the features, right? Can you actually estimate them? Maybe not. This is when the t-shirt sizes come up, the affinity estimation, relative sizing, and all those thought process come into play over here. Don't do planning poker here just because you went and learned about planning poker in Scrum. You have to start thinking like, is this something that I can do? This is a huge one. I don't know what that huge means, right? We have to come down with the t-shirt sizing at this point, our coffee cup sizing and all those things, right? Then you are moving down into, okay, now you're looking at this one. tell me more about this, how much money you can use for maintenance and all those things. And as soon as I say, I have 20 rooms, and I'm thinking like, okay, I cannot do this water, electricity, the bills associated with that, the cleaning and the maintenance, the property tax associated. Oh my God, I can't afford all these things. This is my budget, right? This is how much I can allow and accommodate and things like that. Now you're thinking like, okay, it's not a big house or a duplex home. It's going to be a 2-bedroom apartment or a condo, right? Now you are looking at what do you want in that. So that's when you can actually get into the actual story points. And then once the story points are getting broken down in the planning session as tasks, that's when you actually do the hours. So there is a method to the madness. Right? If you cannot come back and estimate, a theme or a feature and say, I'm going to implement the theme here, you can implement the theme. You only implement the user stories. You can implement them directly, moving forward. You can go from theme to the task right away. There has to be a process, right? We need to understand that and establish the norms around this whole process. Right? If you don't have the appropriate norms, telling your product owner, we cannot estimate this. It needs to be flushed down further. It has to be desegregated or decomposed, and push them more and more and more. That's when it will get broken down and all those things, right? Right. So what is some of the antidote to the planning failure? Avoid the I know what to build syndrome. This is the fundamental reason behind Titanic failure. Why did Titanic sink? Not because of the iceberg, but because we failed to recognize that we are on the pathway to even an iceberg. Right? There were a lot of indications that came up. There were a lot of previous sightings of icebergs in the same path, but we chose to ignore everything because we are Titanic. A huge big ship at that point in time. Avoid that. Become a little bit more complacent and go back and ask people like, what am I not understanding here? What am I missing? You have to ask the devil's advocate thinking. Promote product discovery. When originally the plane was, the Boeing was designed, it was not designed to take a shuttle on its back, right? But we have to come up. If we have to do that, what do we have to do? Right? How do we accommodate the payload? We have to think about that. So promote product discovery. Your product is capable of doing more than what you think it is actually doing, right? And then invest in a coach. You are not going to necessarily know everything, so invest in a coach. This is when continuous learning, continuous training, and all those things keep coming up. A lot of times people ask like, Sriram, why are you constantly studying? What's the idea behind so many credentials and all those things? Because I'm constantly filling my gaps. Right? There is learning never stops, right? Then promote self-organization. When these birds are flying in this murmuration format, who is the leader? Who is the follower? How come they're not hitting each other? When you think about all these patterns, they are self-organized. As soon as one person does something, everybody follows this. So there is a pattern. There is an organizational approach to this. What is that organizational approach? That's called self-organization. We need to become self-organized, but we need to know where we are going so that we are self-organized to go where we are going, right? Those are some of the planning failures, antidote. Now let's take a look at the team. We say we want to empower the team and make sure that they are committed and learning about agile principles and all those things. But how can we make it happen, right? Number one, people are not ready with the updates. When the daily stand-up happens, the daily stand-up already has these 3 questions, right? What are you going to do? What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What's your impediments or roadblocks, right? I don't want to ask these questions because when I go into this daily stand-up, you should be able to talk. I know these 3 questions, so ask those things. As soon as your term comes up, say it. Hey, I worked on this. I'm running into this problem, and I'm planning to get this resolved with working with so and so. You need to be able to say it instead of me actually asking, okay, what did you do yesterday? What did you do? What are you going to do? No, that's not conducive. That's not productive. Right? The daily stand-ups in that become more like a project status meeting, and it is not a project status meeting. Even in a project status meeting, I don't go and ask how much percentage are you complete with this work. My question is, it's done or not done. What's the point in having a task in your work breakdown structure 99.99999% complete, but the remaining 0.0001% is going to be picked up 2 years after, right? blaming on technology for inability to communicate. I'm on different technology, I'm in a different country, I have low bandwidth, I'm sending you a video file, but we are not able to see the video file. We are showing webcam, we are showing chat, no, collaborate. Collaborate at the end of the day to see how you can use technology to solve problem rather than actually relying on technology to create problems, right? Metrics are set up for failure. We have too many metrics. You need to actually start thinking like, how am I going to evaluate the value? Right? That needs to be completely understood at the team level as well as at the product level, right? Then start putting together what you want to measure. So don't have too many metrics. The best approach is having 2 to 3 important metrics that you want to measure. You don't want to have 20 million metrics that can be measured, right? And so don't have too many metrics to begin with. Go back and start looking at what is the right metric, what is the method of measuring, and how frequently I should measure and how much I should report. You should know about those things. If not, don't have metrics just because you are able to put together metrics, right? The next one is incorrect metrics. If you actually have an incorrect metrics, you may actually be doing too much harm to you rather than actually promoting it correctly, right? I have had people that come back and say individual velocity, like, one particular person, how that particular person is providing, how many user stories they completed, what's the total story point that they completed across the sprint. Why measure that? It's about team. It's not about individuals. Oh, we have a little bit of a problem. No, sorry, time out. It's team commitments, folks. It's team, right? Then inaccurate matrices. The good thing about having a matrix is that you have to actually have it in real time. If you don't have a matrix that is actually completely accurate, then it's useless. You may come back and say, the one thing that I want to measure is the velocity. And I go back and say, what's the velocity, last sprint? Oh, I'm still working on it. Why are you not using the appropriate electronic tools to actually let them complete? As soon as the task is complete, the velocity is automatically getting computed. Oh, we don't have the right tools. We are too busy. I'm working on 20 million other things. The transparency, people use credibility in the transparency in that case, right? The next one is going to be risks. Wait for the next daily stand-up. Between 2 different daily stand-up meetings, there's almost 24 hours. Right? If something happens, something you discover, don't wait for, oh, I have to wait for the next daily stand-up to actually get this resolved, because you are not giving enough time to address the risk. And I'm sure you will go through, how risks are getting addressed in a project management. And sometimes people come to me and say, oh, risk management is all in project management. We are all about Agile. Are you telling Agile is immune to risk, that nothing will happen? Whatever you think you will do, you will be able to do without any questions? If that's truly the case, we could automate that whole functionality and we don't need to have any people to do the work, right? So lack of quickly addressing risk is what is the ultimate problem that emanates from waiting for the next day. How does it hurt? We don't have enough time to risk resolve. Right? Well, if only I had this, I would have talked to that other person and figured it out and all those things. Instead, we are basically allowing this to actually resolve it later. We are creating time schedule slips, right? Iteration commitments as the result slip. Well, people come back and say, well, I can do this. The other team members are gone for the day. I can't get the work done, and I need this person to be available, and so we're not able to do this right. Right? So iteration commitments are slipping. We are Agile, we can always catch up in the next iteration. Agile is all about ensuring that you finish what you committed, right? It's not like, oh, we are Agile, we can always do it in the next iteration, throw it back into the backlog. And in the backlog, then we decide something else is more important and half work is done and half work is not done. And then when we choose to do it at a later point, we don't know what we did, and we are creating the context switching, understanding what we did at that particular point, and all these times are getting wasting is not part of Agile, right? Team commitment is missing. When any one of these things are missing, you are missing the team commitment, because at the end of the day, you are committed to ensuring that this work is getting done. If you truly understand that, you will not be waiting for the next daily stand-up meeting to resolve the problem. You will be walking to that person, you will be communicating to this individual saying like, I have a challenge, I ran into this problem, how do I get this resolved? right? Team is demonstrating at this point that they are not focused on value, because they are taking it on, oh, we are agile, it's okay to fail. This is not indication of failure. This is an indication of lack of self-organization and commitment to value, right? So what are some of the antidotes to team failure? From cross-functional team, make sure that, role plays are existing. If I'm a developer this time, I want to pick up some of the testing practices. If I'm a project manager at this point, I want to, think about business analysis. If I'm a business analytic person, so I want to think more about data analytics. I want to think about IT services delivery. I want to think about help desk, so become cross-functional. What do the other people do? Right? Address resistance to embracing agile. If teams are basically demonstrating the self-organization commitment to value that I mentioned before, address that. Go back and say, one of the things that I always said is, every 2 weeks, teams are getting paid their salary. If the value equivalent is not coming to the performing organization for the salary that they were paid, can the actual company go back and dip into their account and say, well, you said you will deliver 100 points worth, and now you only delivered 80 points, so I'm going to take 20% of the salary I deposited out of your bank? If that's not necessarily the case, we have to make the commitment to make sure that we are doing whatever it is to finish the work. Right? There is commitment-driven planning along with velocity-driven planning. Right? Train team on agile practices. What are some of the practices that we have to learn from an agile perspective that makes the team much better? Maybe you have to bring some new tools, maybe some application lifecycle management tools. Maybe you are spending more time on manual manual testing or writing test cases manually, and you could do this with other multiple tools, and you're not investing time and technology on the process and tools that are available. Look at that. Avoid frequent member movements. This person is actually moving to some other project for other roles. This person is only dedicated 50% of the time. These things are not necessarily good, right? And in the business, it's going to happen. Not everybody is going to be the same, because when you are a subject matter expert, you may be borrowed for your knowledge and all those things in other things. But you need to understand how you are going to limit this within an agile setting. Right? So you need to understand that. So then the process failure, instill the operational excellence mindset. Don't compromise on the non-negotiables, quality by design, right? Promote the learning mindset, try to come up with this innovation thought process behind them. How do we do that, right? So too many meetings mean too little work. The more time you spend on the meetings, the more work is not getting done. So I don't even attend meetings where I'm not going to add value. Right? Team's time should not be taken up in too many unnecessary meetings. The reason behind having only a few meetings that we already agreed upon in the iteration planning, the daily stand-up, the review, and the retrospective is primarily to make sure that the hands are on the keyboard, actually, producing working software, more productive work, right? But at some points in time, you need to actually borrow the people to look about, okay, we discovered a new risk, let's talk about this, But it cannot be meetings after meetings after meetings. The next one is the product owner, sets up a meeting with the entire team saying like, okay, we're going to have everybody come together and start talking about grooming session. And that's about, 4 hours that's going to be spent on grooming in every sprint. That's almost like, 5 to 10% of the time gone from your iteration, right? So you expect the team to commit. At the same time, you are taking time away from the team's, ability to work. Right? How is this working? So if you have a product roadmap, you would have known that the next iteration or the next few iterations or in the release is focusing on security. Then you would be only picking up the technical architect, maybe just a user interface engineer, UX experience guy. It depends upon that. You need to actually pick up those kind of proper members to pull it in. Team members serving on multiple teams, including agile and support work. I'm also supposed to take care of the work, but I'm also supposed to take care of the product increment in production. So if there is a problem or escape a defect that comes up in production, then I am actually spending more time on that, but then I'm not able to give this time on this. So this is when resource optimization truly comes into play. Don't give 100% of the team's time only for the sprint or iteration commitments, but actually reserve only about 70% of their time, and remaining 30% of the time they are having to either resolve technical defects that come in production, or technical defects that are coming through in as part of your iteration work, or refactoring or technical debt maintenance, or just thinking about some spikes and interesting experiments that they can try. And we do that in project management ideas as well. Like, 70% of the time we allocate the person, and remaining 30% of the time we actually do not, which is how we are managing risk, principal supply, right? Now, review is not open to the business stakeholders. The idea behind a review is not, it is limited to the actual product team or agile team alone. You need to bring other people to weigh in, because at the end of the day, it's not just about single-minded, narrow vision of how we want to think. Other people's viewpoints truly have to come into play, right? Business stakeholders are not present to review and offer feedback. A legal person, a compliance person, or a technical person, or a customer service or a help desk person, they have to come and actually provide feedback. And again, it depends upon what you are providing for that particular iteration. You're not going to invite everybody, but if the product manager truly understood the logic behind the release map, aligned to the product map and all the roadmap and all those things, then they will say, let me actually include the customer service and help desk members here, or let me actually bring account management and sales folks over here. It could be different people playing different roles at this point, but business stakeholders have to provide feedback, right? The next one is going to be, reviews become surprising to the product owner. If this is truly happening, there is a huge problem that's happening in this team. Either the product owner is not a dedicated person, not making time available, and when you come to the product review meeting and you're feeling like, oh, is this what I asked? Is this what you did? Well, you had 10 days to actually work with the team on a daily basis to figure out what they are doing. It should not become a surprise. The next one is going to be a monopoly of the review time. I want to pick 1 or 2 important stories. 7 people are working on a team. I pick the user stories that are relating to, a couple of people, because I want to only highlight that. And the remaining things, I'm going to have a separate meeting to discuss. No, that's not acceptable. Everybody is equally important over here. You do not monopolize that. You need to have time boxing principles right there. And we are coming up with 2 hours increment for this product review and things like that. We are having that. We are not just necessarily proportioning our time across all the user stories that needs to be reviewed. If we do that, what are we actually also telling? Those members' user stories that never got reviewed, we're telling your user story is not important. In other words, you are not important, and they get checked out, right? That's not good. Right. The next one is going to be retrospective is compromise. Retrospective. This is the team alone focusing on ideas. When retrospective becomes optional because we took up more time on the review or more time on other things, or we have little time to do the review, and when all these things is happening, what are the problems? The first problem is that we are failing to learn. What are we doing good that we need to continue doing? What are we doing that is not necessarily adding value that we should stop doing? What are the things that we are not even doing that we should start doing? So the start, continue, and stop. It's great to have all these agile games about speedboat and all those things, but if you're not actually applying them in proper practice and making it required, in this context, we are failing to learn. If you fail to learn, what happens? Success is not repeated. Then we say, oh, that happened because it was luck. There's no such thing as luck. Right? The next one is going to be, if these 2 things are constantly doing, then we are doing things that do not necessarily add value, and we create waste. And the more waste is getting created, the more management looks at this and say, oh, Agile never works. We tried using Agile and the team cannot produce any value. We may as well, apply some other logic. Right? These are all the problems that manifest in different ways. Right? What are the antidotes to the process failure? Enhance the process discipline. When you have a time boxing principle, make sure that people respect them. There are times when I have given them, index cards, like 2 or 3 index cards. Every time you speak, I will take one of the index cards away. And when you have taken I have taken all the 3 index cards away, what am I telling? You don't have any more right to speak, because you are monopolizing the conversation. When nobody else, the other person is having all the 3 index cards with them, what are they telling? They're not contributing enough. right? Resist the urge for task orientation. You don't want to go with this, I want to create 20 million checklist and at the end of story. At the end of the day, it is not whether you have 15 tasks or 2 tasks. It's all about whether the work gets done or not. How are you actually managing it to getting to the done scenario? Engage stakeholders to commit to Agile. How will they commit to Agile? In the stakeholder engagement discipline of project management, we talk about the stakeholder journey. They are unaware and then they are, big champions. You have to take them through the journey. It's a roller coaster ride. You have to make sure that they are actually going up in that career, in their curve. So you have to commit to that, right? Technology is not sidelined as a value add. We are all about commercial stories. We don't want to talk about technical implementation, technical challenges. That's all to the team. No, it is the team. The product owner is part of the team. The product owner may be thinking from business side, but the product owner should have that cross-functional knowledge to talk about technical side. And the same thing with the technology members who is able to think from the strategy and business side of it. If they both are not aligned, then we are having not the binocular vision, and no binocular vision, things are not going to get done, right? So in summary, I want to bring up closure to this. So strategy files, we talked about the lack of dedicated product owner, or one person serving in multiple roles, or as a result not necessarily picking up the right user stories. And we talked about planning related problems, which is making sure that you are selecting the right stories and spending time for task breakdown as well. And coach actually becoming more of a facilitator and a servant leader rather than a scribe. We talked about when you should actually start estimating in estimation in the first place, and when you should use the relative sizing and affinity estimation and things like that, and when you should use story points and when you should hours, right? We also talked about people not ready with the appropriate level of updates and making sure that we have the right matrices and set them up for success, and also bring the risk management thought process into the fold. And finally, into the process failure, we are talking about how to have the meetings very good, and avoid meetings that are not necessarily required, ensuring that the reviews and the retrospectives have the proper audience and follow through the continuous learning mindset. Okay, and bringing a closure at this point over here, before I turn it over to Kailash. I want to thank you again for this wonderful opportunity. And we do a lot of trainings and all those things. So, if there are more questions about, learning about, certification or non-certification courses, please check with Kailash. Kailash, at this point, I would like to turn it over to you for any additional question as well.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. I must say there are lots of great learning for myself as well. Being a regular practitioner, working with you and many other organization as consulting partner and all, but there are always people like you who always add value to a learner like me. So thanks, Sriram. I really appreciate your time here. Saturday morning for you, and Saturday evening for me and many of my colleagues here in India. Would like to really thank to you. So yes, we have some really great questions, Sriram. I think so. This is the question. Let's take few questions. Neeraj has posted lots of questions. I don't know which question to take, but let's take the question number 2. That's what comes first in my screen. What Neeraj is asking, I think no restriction related to any documentation can also cause Agile to fail. Like no planning documentation and process around it may affect Agile. How is risk be addressed? So Ram, can you see this question and answer to Neeraj, please?
I could not see the question. I'm only seeing the chat window here, but I can definitely
let me post this question one more time. Can you see the question now? The latest question.
Yes, I can see this. I can see this on the chat window. Thanks. Yes. I think no restriction related to any documentation can cause Agile to fail. Like no planning documents and process affect Agile. How is that risk be addressed? So first of all, there is no such thing as there should not be any documentation at all, right? One of the Agile Manifesto principle basically said working software over comprehensive documentation. We did not say we do not want to have documentation. We only said over comprehensive documentation. So what's the definition of comprehensive documentation? What is minimally required to get the work done? If your legal requirements basically say, or a healthcare industry regulator or financial regulator industry requirements basically say you have to have compliance related overview, then create the appropriate level of documentation. But all I am saying is don't create a task and attach a BRD with 50 pages. Then you cannot do this. Then you have to break those business requirements and then put each and every one of them in as a user story format or as a requirement format. Then you can do this. You should also try to bring risk much in advance. Before work actually gets into the definition of ready, you have to consult the business stakeholders to make sure that you have factored risk into the equation. And another sideline question to that is going to be, there are tools that are available in the market called application lifecycle management tools. So if you spend your time on those application lifecycle management tools, there is a complete end-to-end traceability, not just from requirements to test cases, but from requirements to test cases, from test cases to the defects, from defects resolution to the actual product that is released in the product, like a binary. So there is a complete end-to-end traceability available, in many tools, and also backward traceability that are available. So you have to also spend some time on the technology and the processes that are associated with this technology to address this risk. And in my case, I have not been I have not seen any major challenge telling like, oh, we are never going to have any documentation, or we are going to have 500 pages of documentation. Just try to strike the delicate balance. I hope I answered that question. So there's one more question that came up. I'm trying to make sure that I'm picking up in the order that's coming up. Question number 4, whose responsibility is to ensure agile ceremonies to be followed strictly? This question, really strikes me very odd. At the end of the day, it is team. It is the team's commitment to make sure that all agile ceremonies are followed strictly. If the team is not following it, the main person to hold it accountable is the Scrum Master. But it's not just the Scrum Master's role alone. It is the team's responsibility. Everybody is responsible. The question here should be whose accountability and not responsibility. Everybody is responsible for making sure that the ceremonies are followed strictly. You're not going to make sure that we are policing people. But if policing is really required, then accountability rests with the Scrum Master and also to some extent with the product owner. The next question is it required that the agile team need to be at the same location? I mean, product owner and development team, what if both are at, so this has been solved by a number of discussions already, but I'll tell that again. Agile prefers co-location, and the question is why? It's not like, oh, we are outsourced, we are in different parts of the world, we have one team in one location. It's not about the virtual team, distributed team, remote team, is asynchronous team. It's not about that at all. It's all about why Agile said co-location is required. When you look at that, the fundamental reason is osmotic communication, which is like, are you able to pick up things that are not necessarily said? By the non-verbal communication. So 55 to 60% of the communication is non-verbal. And when the team becomes remote and the team becomes distributed for reasons that you mentioned to me at this point, then how are we actually using the power of technology to collaborate faster? In that particular case, you may have to have a little bit more frequent meetings, more proper handoff tools, where there is proper workflow mechanism and all those things. So the product owner in that particular case will be able to create a pseudo product owner in a different team, in a different location, and that person will act as the product owner proxy. So there are ways we can handle this. Agile is not set that we have to only do this. Remember, Agile is just a business framework to deliver value. Outsourcing and remote team distribution, all those things are business model. So Agile should work within the business model context. So if your team has to be distributed based upon your business model, then Agile should adapt its ways to make sure that it is getting done. Agile is not going to adapt itself, but the team members that follow Agile should adapt. I hope I answered that question completely to you. Question number 5, is it required that the Agile team need to, no, I think I answered that, sorry. Question number 7, who should be invited in the retrospective meeting? Only team. Retrospective is limited only to the team. What are we focusing on the retrospective? What what should we start doing that we are not doing? What should we continue doing with any refinements that we are actually doing right now? What are we doing that we should stop doing because it's not adding any value? So those are the things, the start, continue, and the stop. That's what we should actually start looking at. What is stalling? What is accelerating? What is decelerating? The speedboat. Right? When you look at that, it's the team that delivered the work, the product owner, the scrum master, and the actual delivery team. It's those people that needs to be part of the retrospective. Your question should be focused on who should be invited to the product review meeting. The product review meeting is where you are actually showcasing the work that is completed. That's when you will be able to invite other business stakeholders depending upon what the release is. Maybe you will be inviting the IT guys, the compliance and legal folks, when you are talking about security related functionality being addressed. But when you are talking about a user experience related work or a new product shopping cart that is getting added, you may probably want to bring those creative people and sales folks. When you are introducing new functionality that is actually behind the screens or in front of the screen work that actually people can do their own reporting and things like that, you will be bringing the project managers and account managers and other product developers and all those things. So the question is, it depends upon what's in the product roadmap and what is actually getting released in the releases and what is actually for the focus of the iteration. So remember, reviews have business stakeholders included based upon the need of the focus of the actual iteration goals and release goals. In the retrospective, it's only the team. Okay, just going goes. I think this is not a question, but in case minimal required, the definition varies from person to person, and always chance that people use this loophole to in their benefit. And absolutely, the minimal, absolutely, this is all the more reason why people come to me and say, what's minimally required? Well, I don't know what you are trying to do. If I'm feeding 2 people, what is minimally required is food for those 2 people. If I'm feeding 200 people, what is required is a little bit more than what I have to do for 2 people. So again, you have to go back to the product owners. That's all the more reason why I talked about those hardening iteration and all those things, where you have to come down with the norms that you need to establish. What's the definition of ready? What's the definition of done? What's minimally required for me to move forward? What are the must to do, the should to do, the could to do, and the won't. You have to think about those things. That's the reason why I'm saying planning is not an optional feature in Agile. We are Agile, so let's just do whatever we want. That's not necessarily what Agile is. So you need to go back and start thinking, what is the business reasons for which we exist? What's the reason behind why we are doing this product? Who are our personas? Who are our end users? What do we need to know? How are we releasing the product? You need to answer all those gamut of questions and get the definition of ready and the definition of done and the team norms and all those things. And I don't want to talk about specific things. There are a lot of people that basically put together things in a wiki page and forget about it. But that's not necessarily the case. These norms, these definition of done and reviews have to be constantly reviewed as well. They are iterative in nature too. Okay. Okay, just scrolling down. What's your view on team member also playing the role of the Scrum Master? Does the team member also have additional responsibilities? That's a question you should be asking. If the team member is actually playing the role of the Scrum Master, and according to the role of the Scrum Master, the responsibility calls for actually becoming a servant leader, is that person actually a servant leader? Does that person know even how to become a servant leader? This is the reason why I'm telling, a lot of times people will come back and say, well, this is a QA lead and I'm going to make that person a project manager. Will that QA lead actually know how to manage scope, schedule, risk, stakeholders, procurement? If the answer is no, how can you become a project manager? The same logic applies over here. You can fit a role sometime, but you cannot fill the role all the time. So the question is going back and looking at, is this person really the right fit for playing the Scrum Master role? And for how long? So you have to go and ask those questions before you actually say, is it okay or not okay?
Sriram, I think so. Thanks for your time here. I'm really sorry to cut you in between, Sriram, because we keep questions coming in from the participant. Neeraj, we really sorry to for not able to answer many more questions. Of course, there are many more questions. Do post these questions to us. Sriram and myself will answer you the question, and if you really want to be more depth understanding of the agile and various agile framework, not only which people say the scaled agile is popular, the scrum is popular, or any other framework is popular, but we focus more on the, of course there's a different framework coming, the discipline agile and all those things. We more talk about the agile and the core lean principles and all those things. So I think so we will discuss more on some other time on all those things. Once again, Sriram, thank you very much for your this really wonderful and great session, and thank you for your time here. Thank you, participant, for here. We'll also able to we'll send you the recording maybe in couple of days, and please do visit the recording over Add-on Skills YouTube page, and do post your questions out there on the YouTube video as well, so Sriram and myself both can answer those questions. So thanks all. Please have a great day, and thank you, Sriram, and see you all. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Kailash. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.